Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes coming to you this Thursday morning, talking to you about cooperatives. The show is called Everything Cooperative. And this morning, we're excited because we have Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard on the show for this morning. She has written a book called Collective Carriage, A History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Good morning, Jessica.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for taking out time to be with us this morning. You know, let's get right into it. I understand it took you 10 years to write this book.
Yeah, at least.
Okay. What were some of the major things that you learned about this cooperative economics, this cooperative business model?
Right. Well, one of the things I learned, which is why it ended up taking 10 years, is that there was a very long and strong history, but a hidden history. So I've been uncovering more and more things. In fact, I'm still uncovering stuff now, even after the book's been published. So the first thing is I thought, maybe I'd find a few things and just show that there was some kind of history. And then I found out that there's just this extensive history, basically every period of time since African Americans ended up on this continent till now. We've had some kind of cooperative economic practice. Sometimes there have been periods of a lot more activity and sometimes less activity. Often that was because of either economic conditions or we didn't always have organizations promoting and helping with the development. The other thing I think I would say that I learned is there's a strong role for black women. I guess black women have pretty much been involved in all the movements in African-American history, but I didn't know until I started looking into it that the black women often were the ones pushing and promoting and making sure the co-ops happened and survived, that kind of thing. So that's also been a great find. And then I'm now calling the African-American Civil Rights Movement the silent partner to the long Civil Rights Movement, because pretty much all the different, not just the 60s civil rights, but all the different movements for black liberation also included, often quietly, a strategy for economic cooperation to lead to more economic independence as well as more sharing of the wealth in the African American community.
Wow, that's a lot. That is a lot. Okay. Because what I'm wanting us to do today is to take what you've learned about history and see how we can make it apply in today's world. And I have also found that most of these are affordable housing co-ops, all except one out of maybe 14 properties have been women-run, mostly women as presidents and mostly women on the board. So I have noticed that also.
Right.
But it's like...
But, there was a study, I think, out of Emory in Atlanta several years ago that actually they studied the dopamine levels in people, and black women and women in general got more dopamine higher on cooperating than men did, even though men also got some dopamine from cooperating. So no one really followed up on that study, but it is interesting, I think, that women seem to really thrive on cooperating.
What is dopamine?
Oh, that's endorphins in the human body that make us feel high and happy.
Oh, so you don't need alcohol or
right? No, you just need to cooperate. Right.
So if you cooperate, you can feel better.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know why no one ever followed up on that study, but anyway.
Oh no, I like that study because.
Yeah, I think it was in the New York Times, but it would have been like 9 or 10 years ago now.
So you can feel good about self and feel great about if you cooperate.
Right. The act of cooperating, sharing, and working with other people. And apparently, at least the first study showed women get even more endorphins than men from this, but both get some.
Well, I often wonder why we don't have more cooperatives, because the studies that I have seen and read about housing co-ops, there's less foreclosures, the rents are lower, the properties are kept in better shape, people feel better about themselves and their community. They strive better in the cooperative, and it's mainly affordable housing co-ops. I'm talking about. These studies have been done on. So you look at every aspect. Oh, they also create wealth.
Yep.
Every aspect of life, they're better. So why aren't there more? And you said in some parts of history, over time, you see more activity in co-ops and then sometimes less. Do you have any sense of why we don't have more co-ops?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm asked that question all the time. And second of all, it was sort of one of the questions behind my trying to understand the history. There's probably at least 3 good reasons. Sometimes I think I say 5, but I don't know if I remember all 5 this morning. But anyway, the first good reason, well, actually, there's 2 contenders for the first. One, I have to say, and it's partly why the book is called Collective Courage, because unfortunately in our capitalist, racist society, when people, even people who are just doing co-ops and not black people, but particularly when black people were trying to do co-ops, they often, very often, too often, were sabotaged by either white competitors or white supremacists who didn't want blacks to be able to succeed. So too many of my examples have problems with either actual physical sabotage, meaning the place was burned down or the members were harassed or killed, lynched or whatever, or economic sabotage where the banks colluded not to support a co-op, or the white community, boycotted it, that kind of thing, so it couldn't succeed. So, in fact, most of the quote-unquote failures were because of one or two of these kinds of sabotages. So we do have both, economic, racial, et cetera, sabotage in a society that doesn't want alternative models to be successful, because then it shows that we don't have to have capitalism. So unfortunately, so part of it is the ideology of capitalism, that people don't understand, learn, or know enough about co-ops as an alternative model. We don't study it, learn it. People don't know how to do it. And then there's the actual physical sabotage of people trying to stop people from doing it. So those are, I guess, the 2 contending number 1, number 2 reasons.
So the first reason is sabotage. The people don't want it, either because of capitalism, they want capitalism, they don't want an alternative, and racism, they don't want blacks to be successful. And the second is that people just don't know about them. Right,
the education. We don't educate ourselves partly, again, because of the ideology of capitalism, but we don't know enough. Sometimes we don't even know that the model exists. Sometimes all we've heard about the model is that it doesn't work. That's when I first started talking about the model. That's what everybody told me. Oh, they don't work. You can't use them. And people told me, well, black people don't know how to cooperate, which, of course, is just totally wrong. But that's the underlying sense that people have.
Well, National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program just to get the information out.
Right.
That's one of the main reasons for having this program on, and that's why we're so glad you're on. And we're really thankful for Chuck Snyder and the folks at NCB for sponsoring this program. So the third reason why there aren't more co-ops?
So then, the education is a big reason. And then sort of an education piece, but a little bit more on the business side, the third reason would be we don't have good strategies for how to run co-op businesses. Or I shouldn't say we don't have good strategies. Again, we don't have good dissemination of the strategies. So we actually know now, especially in the late 20th, early 21st century, the things that make cooperatives work well: developing trust, figuring out how to work democratically in terms of how to come to decisions consensually, how to operate managed by committee, how to make sure people are continuously educated in the learning community so that the co-op can keep growing as new issues come up and new strategies are learned, that kind of thing. But certainly in the past, we didn't always know what all those good business strategies were for co-op businesses, and often, again, people weren't exposed to them or weren't taught them or didn't know how to gain that information. So it's sort of another level of the education thing, but specifically about the business model itself and how to make it work well. And strategies for coming to consensus. We've been building and developing those over the years, so they weren't always in place early on. So those, I guess, would be the major things. And finally, the one that most people in the business world think of as first would be capitalization. Not enough money up front, often because, especially in the black community, the people who want to do a co-op usually don't have a lot of savings or money to put in. And yet you have to have some equity in there. You have to have a way to figure out how to get loans or donations or grants. And sometimes it's hard, especially, again, in a system where people either don't understand or believe in cooperatives. It's hard to then get people to invest in them.
You know, I got my MBA from Stanford, and one of the things I've said over and over again, nowhere in my 2 years there that I hear the word cooperative, not in the term of cooperative model, cooperative business model. And I was absolutely amazed. I spoke, there was a White House briefing in 2012, and I had the pleasure of being there, and I said the same thing to a group of 150 cooperators and some White House staff. Mm-hmm. And a gentleman there said, did you know that Leland Stanford, who started Stanford, he was a railroad baron, so he was a capitalist. Right. But as a senator, he had written laws to create worker co-ops. So somewhere he got the wisdom or the knowledge. And so it was like he also wanted Stanford when he started Stanford about the same time. His son had died, and he sort of had a transformation of wanting to create the Stanford University and create worker co-ops. So it was just amazing that folks don't know about them. And here you had somebody who was trying, but Stanford doesn't teach it at all.
Doesn't even teach it, yeah. That's a problem throughout the country. We have very few business schools who teach it. Most economics departments don't teach it. The best places we have right now are actually ag co-op schools, agricultural co-op schools, and then consumer co-op. Consumer education often will teach cooperatives as a strategy for consumer control. But then, it's a real struggle. But we're getting better, right? We've got some places around the country now that are actually teaching co-op economics.
Well, you know, we have to take a break in a minute here, our first break. But you got capitalism is a reason, capitalist, racist, sabotage. Education comes up twice, not education from a standpoint that people don't know about co-ops, and then education don't know how to run co-ops. Right. And the fourth one is not enough money. So you need capital, and that's what I was trying to get to. Leland Stanford had said, get rid of capitalism and go to cooperative. And I think you need both. But it's how do you get both to marry together? Because too much of the capitalism, which I talked about, I think last week, the people that have the money want to make more money, and they want to create laws that give them more money and not have people get money.
Right. Well, there's actually lots of examples of them coexisting.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back and take up this subject as soon as we get back. Please do not touch that dial.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
You know, information is power, and this is the reason that the National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program to give you the information about cooperatives, so that if you take this information and put action to it, then you can have the power. At Greenbelt Homes Co-op, I saw a sign that says that co-ops gives people the tools to control their own destiny. Mm-hmm. So in co-ops, you get the tools, and those tools are education. And what Dr. Jessica Nembhard, Gordon Nembhard had just told us is that the 4 reasons that co-ops don't work, 2 of them is lack of education, not knowing about co-ops, and then not knowing how to work them so that they can be successful. Jessica, thank you so very much for being on this show. You have this book is full of information. But at that White House conference briefing on co-ops, I had come up with the conclusion looking at HUD. HUD spends most of its money to create apartment buildings. Mm-hmm. And so I came up with the people that own the apartment buildings are wealthy people. Poor people don't own apartment buildings, and therefore they can't create wealth. And so I had come up with that the rich, particularly in today's economic political system, they give more and more money to the politicians, and the politicians, therefore, will create programs and laws that will help the rich.
Benefit them, right.
And so I was thinking that's one of the reasons you don't have affordable housing co-ops, because affordable housing co-ops, for the things that we talked about early, benefit the people that's 50% or below the median family income,
yep.
and not the wealthy. So therefore, you don't have these programs that will put money into affordable housing co-ops and perhaps other kinds of businesses that would give the wealth to the masses of people. Does that make sense to you also?
Yes, absolutely. I think in affordable, the housing stuff is a real huge issue. We don't want tenants to own their own housing, and we want to use housing as a way to make money for the rich. I think, there are good models for how, as how the co-op housing can help. I'm actually working with a group in D.C., One D.C., Organizing Neighborhood Equity, and one of our strategies is to help tenants to take over their buildings and to turn them into co-ops and to help teach them how to run their buildings as a co-op, own and run their buildings as a co-op. So again, I think part of it is we just need the political will, right? We need to figure out how to take politics out, away from the wealthy and make it work for the moderate and the poor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sort of goes back to your question about whether co-ops can coexist with capitalism or what. I actually believe we could move toward a whole cooperative commonwealth system, and we wouldn't need capitalism. But until we get there, I totally agree that co-ops can exist with capitalism. In fact, they're existing with capitalism right now in the U.S. Some of our largest farm businesses are cooperatives. And there's, actually a large cooperative movement in the world. Italy and Spain and Canada and France actually have strong, huge co-op sectors that are right there holding their own with the capitalist corporation. So I do think that they're all viable. I think it's really about political will and making sure we care about the have-nots and the people who have less and want to do something to help them. And actually, it's not just help them. The one thing about co-ops is they help themselves, like the quote you just gave, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing, even some conservatives like about co-ops is that they see it's people helping themselves. And in some ways, some people even see it as private ownership. It's just collective private ownership.
It's all Chuck Snyder, when he was on the program, he's the president of NCB. He said co-ops are very simple. They're people helping people. Right. That's his real simple quote. But for people out there that don't know what co-ops are any business that you could think of could be cooperative. And that's owned by, it gets to who owns it. And if it's a business that's owned by the employees, it's called a worker cooperative. If it's a business that's owned by the people that use the products or services, it's called a consumer co-op. And those are the main two, but there are others. Particularly farmers come together and they buy products together, get a cheaper price, and they're called purchasing cooperatives. And then sometimes they get together and they sell their products together to get to different markets and better pricing, and it's called a marketing co-op. So those are your main four, but you have different variations. Sometimes you have a worker cooperative and a consumer cooperative together where both will own the business. Let's go to your part one, early African-American cooperative roots. What are those roots? What did you find out in this section of your book?
So here again, this was some of the surprise, right? That as early as the mid to late 1700s, African Americans were practicing economic cooperation. Most of it was what we call mutual aid societies, where groups of people who already know each other collect dues in order to help each other pay certain things. They start out with burial societies, sickness and health, hospitalization, widow and orphans. So everybody puts in a certain amount of dues, and then whoever needs it from the group is able to take it out. So that's a sort of a precursor to what we consider the formal co-op businesses we have now. Even the Underground Railroad, we talk about as having been a kind of cooperative venture because of all the sharing of resources that had to happen for that to work. And then, you know, I rely heavily on W.E.B. Du Bois for some of this early history, who actually considered joint stock ownership of businesses among African Americans to be a kind of economic cooperation because it was a way to pool resources to own a business. In those cases, it wasn't necessarily a democratic business, which is really what a co-op is about, that democratic way to own something. But it was the beginning of sharing resources, having viable businesses. But then also by the 1800s, we were actually creating official co-op businesses, not just the mutual aid societies, but they were morphing into co-ops, into mutual insurance companies, which are co-ops, credit unions eventually, and worker co-ops, consumer co-ops. So that by the late 1800s, we actually had an African-American co-op organization, the Colored Farmers Alliance and Cooperative Union. We had the early labor unions in the 1880s, which were fighting in the progressive movement, were also integrated, and they were promoting worker co-ops as a way for labor to actually control their own workplace, not just to try to argue for better jobs. And those early labor unions actually surprisingly were connected to the co-op movement as well as were integrated, both things which then, split by the 20th century. The labor unions were very racist and were not allowing blacks in, and they were many of them had given up on the co-op movement. But in the 1880s, there was this integrated movement, and they were very much under attack. That's partly why they split off, because it was very difficult for them to even operate either as integrated or trying to do the co-op cotton gins and things like that. Also, early farming organizations, again, 1880s, 1890s into the 20th century. African-American had co-op farms, what they call them, exchanges, where you would deposit your money so that another African-American could borrow it to buy a house instead of having to use a white bank, which was more likely to foreclose on them. They would buy tractors together, sometimes buy land together, buy supplies together. So lots of organization going on, particularly around either at times of very political activity or times of economic problems. So they use the co-ops for economic survival, and they use the co-ops to support their political activity and part of their political fight for economic independence as well as political justice.
Well, it sounds like when we talk about what we need today, it's the same thing. Is we talk about economic, political systems and coming together. And Frederick Douglass was very active with co-ops, too, in the 1800s.
Yes, I don't have as much about his activity. That's why I keep telling people, I need to write a second volume, and, I keep learning new things and finding new stuff. I found out the other day that Martin Luther King was trying to do a credit union. So that's why somewhere I say that pretty much any, especially in the 20th century, but even in the 19th century, almost any black leader we can talk about somehow dabbled in co-ops, either was a member of a co-op, promoted co-ops, studied co-ops, tried to get their organization to support co-ops, something. It's very hard to find a black leader who wasn't somehow connected, involved, or promoting co-op development in the black community.
It's so fascinating because, again, I have 2 master's degrees, and none of my education, whether it's high school or college, and I went to a historically black college, that just came up, and it's so unfortunate. And that's the reason I'm volunteering my time to do this show. Is I really would like people to get out and to know about this model. It's
really great that you've got this show. It's just another extension of some of the work I've been trying to do in terms of really just getting this out, right? Originally, I just wanted to document that we did something in this area. And as I said before, I had no idea it was going to turn out to be so much information. And, you know, I've just really skimmed the surface in some ways. There's still lots more people could be discovering. I'm now trying to get people to do their own research about their own neighborhood, co-op, region, or whatever, because there's just so much more we could uncover.
We'll be right back.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Welcome back, everybody. We have online with us Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard, who has written a book, Collective Courage, and it does take courage to start a business, to run a business, and sometimes to fight off folks that don't want you to be successful, particularly African Americans. In our history and even today, I would contend that some folks still would not like to see us be successful business persons. For a whole bunch of reasons, a lot of it economics. They want to keep the money for themselves too often. Dr. Jessica Nembhard, let's go back to...
Oh, sorry, it's Nembhard. I guess I should correct you, right?
Appreciate it. Thank you. Because, okay, Nembhard, that makes better sense the way it's... Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Oh, and I want to get this in because I've taught for 12 years of my career, 11 at the college level, and I really want to congratulate you in getting full professorship.
Oh, thank you.
That is not easy, and I totally appreciate it. That means you've been working very hard.
Thank you. I have, and it feels really good to, you know, get to the pinnacle of my profession.
And it says a lot, so congratulations again. And this study, I would assume this study and this book helped you to get there because
Absolutely.
You've uncovered a lot of great stuff here. Going back to what kind of Black study circles, how did people use education in these cooperatives to help develop families and help push the political and economic agendas for Black Americans?
So another actually surprising, I guess everything's been surprising, right? Another surprising thing in this research was that basically every Black co-op that I found something about started with a study group, either a study circle, a study effort, whatever. Sometimes they studied for a year or more before they started or opened a cooperative. Sometimes it was just a couple of meetings. But everybody recognized that they needed to come together. Sometimes they actually started out coming together just talking about what the problems were and then coming to the idea about a co-op and then educating themselves about a co-op and then starting a co-op. So the study circle, study group, education in that sense has been essential. The other thing that I noticed in some, like there was one of the co-ops in Gary, Indiana during the Great Depression in the 30s. They're a perfect example of this. Consumers Cooperative Trading Association, I think is their name, in the 1930s. They first came together. They started meeting at the high school, the Black high school. Some of the teachers, the principal, and some other community members talking about the fact that all the banks had left their community. They could barely afford food and gas, etc. They started learning about the co-op movement. I think they even may have studied some co-ops in other communities. They put a class into their night school program on cooperative economics that became the largest subscribed night school class in its history at that time. And then they created a women's auxiliary from the study group, and the women's auxiliary is actually the one credited with having pushed through the actual opening of their co-op store. They opened a branch store. Another 2 years later, they opened a credit union and a gas station. And when the interviews of the people involved all talk about how whenever things started to lull, things looked like they weren't going on, they reconstituted their study group. The women and the women's auxiliary kind of pushed everybody and said, we got to do this, keep going, keep going. They had the largest black grocery store in the country in 1936. Their co-op was the largest black, at least as far as they could tell. So they really did well, but their whole beginnings as well as their ability to keep going was based on their study circle and their study programs, their education programs, and the work they did in advocacy groups. We've got other co-ops that actually have participated in policy advocacy locally and statewide in order to make sure the things they needed for their co-ops and for their people happened. So the Federation of Southern Cooperatives from the 60s on has been involved in advocating for farm bills and other policies to support black farmers and co-op development. Cooperative Home Care Associates in the South Bronx was part of the movement to make sure that Medicaid paid for home care workers, because then that was their business, home health care. And if they could get Medicaid payments, that meant they could up the rates in the industry for home care so that when they asked for living wage work, it wasn't a big gap in the industry because, of course, in the industry, the wages have been very low. So there's all kinds of different types of advocacy, policy development, education, promotion that happened because, again, people would come together, say they had needs, start to study the co-op model, and then use the co-op model to advance the other needs that they had.
Well, I started one program off by saying that if it wasn't for the cooperative model, the civil rights movement as we have known it in the 60s would not have happened, or definitely would not have happened the way that it did happen because of the education that folks in the civil rights movement got, whether it was Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King or Stokely Carmichael. They were getting this education about what does it mean and how do you work together. Right. So that sort of fits that this advocacy groups getting education, figuring out what they needed, and then figuring out how they can get it through, I like this high school night program in Gary, Indiana. Is you got to have the education piece. And that's one of the reasons I have fallen in love with co-op model.
Yeah. And also the advocacy that comes from learning how to cooperate economically with people, it just spills over into the rest of your life. So I also did a study. It's not as much in this book, but I've written about how when you look at what happens to people who are in cooperative businesses, right, because you learn how to share information, how to make decisions together, how to develop leadership, etc., you don't just do it in your co-op. You start doing it in the rest of your life. You become more involved in the PTA, your children's school, or you join another organization, or you run for office, or you get on the board of the local credit union, or anyway. So it's all those things you learn how to be a better citizen. You get more civically involved. You get your family, some more of your community civically involved. So there's all kinds of these social capital spillover effects and other effects, not just that you could have a viable economic business. Also, because co-ops tend to buy locally and support local activity, they stabilize economic activity in a community. They help resources to just keep recirculating in a community instead of going out of the community after they've been used once. So there's lots of these other kinds of impacts that's why I sort of talk about the goal is a whole cooperative commonwealth. Because if you could think about co-op businesses in all the different sectors and then all the other ways that co-ops support community and human development, once you get a significant mass of co-ops happening, you get all these other benefits and things flourishing.
This has come up several times on the program, and that there was a lady on by the name of Ruthie Wilder, who's the president of a housing co-op in Baltimore, and she had said that that's exactly what happened. The things that she learned in the co-op, and she's she worked for the rapid transit system, I think driving a train in Baltimore. So she didn't get this education in college of how to run a business. She got it in going to classes and learning how to run her co-op. She said it went to her personal life, that she could run her family better. The economics of her family worked out better. I really thought she was going to tell me, and she did not go this far, was it also helped her with her relationship with her man, that she could learn how to work better together. She didn't go quite that far. But
that's a whole nother study we need to do. I think you're probably right, but nobody's been talking about that yet.
Okay.
But you do learn, especially when we learn how to come to consensus in a democratic organization, right? That's got to spill over in how to work with other people, especially people intimate in your life, right?
Yeah, and raising children is similar. It is a give and take with children, particularly if you have educated them to think independently. They're going to challenge you. So how do you learn how to work together is awesome. And then we had a guy named Papa Sin from Senegal, and he talked about how the people in the co-op, he moved from the farm to one of the cities. I don't remember which one, and on the outskirts, and they needed housing, so they started a housing co-op. Then they needed transportation to get people to work, and so they got some buses and started a transportation. Then they needed schools, so they started a co-op. He said, as the community needs things, they started. But he was saying that the people if you look at the politicians, that most of them in that area came from the co-ops. Yep.
The Federation of Southern Cooperatives talks about that too. They have a lot of their staff and members who then went on for political roles, got elected in places. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
The education spills over. I always come back to why there aren't more and what forces keeps us from having more because of all of the good that these co-ops have done throughout history and even today.
Right.
Somebody on the program said I had a sinister view in that I believe that the people in power, those 1%ers, don't want people to know about co-ops.
Oh, I agree. I think that's one of the biggest problems. As I said, they don't want people to know about it, and sometimes they're willing to sabotage the ones that are there, right? They withdraw money from it. They don't, they get banks. I mean, we still have examples.
You think that's still going on today?
I thought, and all the banks agree not to give them. Or we have this problem now, or the banks say for worker co-ops, right? The banks won't give loans because they have to have a single. What is it called? They have to have one person responsible for the collateral or whatever. And in a worker co-op, there is no one person, right? It's the collective. So we're even for credit unions, trying to get credit unions to give loans to worker co-ops. They have to have waivers that they can, waive that requirement of having a single, I forget what the term is, but that they can lend to a worker co-op as a collective. So we have things built into our system that are anti-collective ownership and recognition of the collective. Most of how we operate is all still requiring single proprietor, a single name or person to take all the responsibility to be the holder of the whatever. For years we had women, right, needed their husbands to co-sign. I had one person tell me in 2005, I guess it was, that she still had to get her husband to co-sign a loan for her that she was taking out to put her share of the business, to put into her share of the business. But the loan had to come with her husband co-signing for her. That's within the last 10 years. So we have all these rules, regulations that are based on this, patriarchal, capitalist, soul, individual model, that even when we got people that agree we need co-ops and stuff, they have these stumbling blocks.
I thought you were talking about when we first started about these blocks, that was in the past.
No, some of them are still existing.
I know, but
and even black credit markets, right? We still have that subprime problem. We finally recognized it when we had the housing crash, but it doesn't mean it stopped, right? Mm-hmm. But most black businesses, black landowners, black housing owners have to pay a higher interest rate to get a loan because of the racism and the structural racism in our country. even when they have the same or better credit ratings and income history and all that kind of stuff. And so if you end up paying more interest on a loan, that means less money can go into your business or less money to help you continue to make the payments, et cetera. And that's going on right now.
We have to take our final break. You know, Dr. Gordon Nembhard, I knew that you had way too much information for us to cover in 1 hour. But we only have one more segment to go, and we'll come back. Please don't touch the dial. We'll be right back.
News updates on the web at WOLDCnews.com.
Information is power, and that's why National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program. NCB's mission is to help cooperatives grow by supporting and being an advocate for Americans' cooperatives and their members, placing special emphasis on serving the needs of communities that are economically challenged. And as we took the break, a lot of the African American, Native American, Latino American communities are economically challenged. So NCB was formed in the 80s to provide financial assistance, financial loans and so forth to these communities to create co-ops. And they have a tough job to do. They've done it well, I think, because most banks, they're only looking at one thing is how much capital do you have to pay it back. And more often than not, African Americans have not created capital. The system does not, which we've talked about in the past, doesn't give us a lot of ways of creating. We're spending most of our monies just to live. So we don't have ways to, nor do we have knowledge on how to create this capital. So in our last 15 minutes, Dr. Gordon Nembhard.
Yes.
Nembhard.
Yes.
What do you want to leave our listeners with? What?
Well, my son keeps telling me whenever I give these talks that I have to remind people that, yes, the history is important, and the history is important to show we have a legacy and we've been able to do it, but we really need to focus on the present and the future and talking about how we can keep this legacy going, how we can use more cooperatives. And so he likes me to not just focus on the past. So actually you and I haven't focused as much on the past as I sometimes do, and to talk about the future. And one of the things for me about this book is it shows that we have and we can do it, right? So there shouldn't be any blocks. I mean, we know what the blocks are. We're starting to understand the blocks, but that shouldn't be stopping us because we know we can do this. We know the co-op model is a viable model. We know that African Americans have used it over and over and over again. We know what how to do it successfully, good education, figure out access to capital, but even just pooling scarce resources helps, leadership development, trying to get policies changed to be supportive, but even without the policy changes, things that we can do. Having the thing we didn't talk that much about is having strong organizations to support. Every period, there's like 3 periods that I found the most active for black co-ops. One was the 1880s, one was the 1930s, and one was the 1960s and 70s. And in all those cases, the thing that's the same is strong black organizations that were helping to support cooperative development and black leadership. Things that were different were the 60s were actually not an economic problem, but they were a problem of, strong black political involvement. The 1880s and the Great Depression were economic problems, so in some ways people were looking more about survival. But they were also looking at black leadership development and black ownership and how to propel blacks in a time when, society was sort of against them. But this understanding of the role of deliberate cooperative development strategies with black organizations is really important. The 30s had the Young Negroes Cooperative League. They had Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was a black union, but they were supporting co-op development as a way to keep hard-earned black union money in the black community and doing more supports for the rest of the black community. In the 60s, we had all the black civil rights movements, and the Black Panthers, the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, even the Nation of Islam, right? We're all supporting and doing black co-ops as part of their strategy, even though we learned more about them from their political and social activities. So I think understanding that we need strong organizations to support this, we need good education, and we just need to know that it's not a model that's foreign to us or alien to us, but it's a model that we've helped to develop through the centuries and that we can embrace, I think is very important.
Well, I think your son is very wise. He
yes,
probably got that from his
very
mom.
Wise.
He got it from his mom and dad.
Okay. Thanks.
So it's like, okay, how do we take the lessons from the past? And I've reached out to the Urban League and to, I just had one of those senior moments, but it's trying to get to that. Now I have a sense of why we need those, and can we get it? And I was just listening to Minister Farrakhan talking about repatriation, of trying to get money for blacks for all of the things that has happened to us. And I thought, well, maybe getting to him. I did not know that they had that history of going there. So it's like, how do we get these organizations or create some organizations? Al Sharpton was the name I was looking for. I reached out to him to try to get him. He seems to have a lot of political power today with his TV show, too.
Yeah, he would be a great one, actually. I hadn't thought about him lately, but we do need to. I mean, that's part of my mission, right, is I've been trying to talk. I actually gave some presentations several years ago at National Urban League Black Economic Conferences. So I've been trying to get the word out. I think having finally published this book is even helping more, because I am luckily doing a lot of book talks all over the country to a variety of organizations. Often it's existing co-op organizations, but sometimes it's black groups who just want to know more about it. But I think that's what we need to do, is arm them with some of these, quote, facts and figures, either how their organization did support this in the past, or that, the thing we were talking about before about all the different benefits, right, of co-ops in communities, and then also some simple strategies of how to just start, right? I think that's the other thing. People think, okay, it's a great idea, but how do we start, especially when everybody says it's so hard to get the money, right? That's the other sort of lesson learned from the Black history, is that people just started, right? They just came together and started talking about this stuff. And then they realized, okay, if we need this amount of money, how do we get it? They would start, back to the mutual aid societies, just collecting dues, right? Everybody put in $1 every time we meet. Everybody try to raise $100 this year or $200 this year, and then get matching funds, right? That's one of the great things about the co-op model, is this, because it believes that people should put in equity, even if it's just as little equity as they have or as much as they have, you can then leverage it. Because once everybody has put in something, then you can go to a bank or go to a foundation or another lender or a quiet donor and say, we've all put in this much, we've raised this much, we've got this business model, we know what we're doing, we just need this money and we can do this, right? Especially nowadays with the social investing. It's relatively easy to get people who are willing to take, to have either to be a quiet investor or to be a long-term investor. So they're investing as much in the social mission as in getting some money return on their investment, right? So you can get them to, to accept a lower than commercial interest rate on their loan. You can get them to accept 5 or 10 years before they get paid back, because they're willing to invest in it as a social venture too, right? And we've got a lot of examples of that as well. So there are ways now that we can think about putting these packages together of how to raise money, especially once, as I said, the co-op model is helping ourselves first, right? So once you see that everybody put in equity as much as they could from their own pot, you pool that, and then you take that and leverage it to get money from other places.
Well, I would like to work with you. Your goal is very similar to mine, and that is to get people to understand this. And I would love to see putting together a package. I gave a presentation to a group of Appalachia education folks in Appalachia, where I grew up in West Virginia. And so been on a board of trying to get more and more folks in this board in West Virginia to go to college. So I gave them a presentation on this co-op model, and they were shocked, amazed, surprised. So it was this lack of knowledge about it. But I would love to see this piece on what other organizations have done in the past, like the Urban League. What are the lessons learned, or what are the benefits of co-ops, and then how to start. I would love to see that piece and either present or come somewhere where you're presenting.
Yeah, I have a document on the benefits of co-ops. I can make sure I did a white paper on that, which I can make sure you get. And then we probably need to put together a short briefing on sort of what some of these organizations have done in the past in the co-op movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can put those together and figure out how to move from there.
Time is almost up. I love talking about the co-op principles. You've hit on a number of them: volunteer and open membership, democratic member control, members' economic participation, which you just finished talking about, autonomy and independence. They have to have control of the place. And number 5 is my favorite.
Right.
Yeah, it's their business. Number 5 is education, training, and information.
Yep, continuous.
And then the 6th one is cooperation among cooperatives.
Yep,
and
that's the whole co-op commonwealth idea. You have these interlocking co-ops that help support and supply each other and work together in a region or among a community.
And the 7th is concern for community, and you've already talked about that too. They're built in. Dame Pauline Green from ICA, International Cooperative Alliance, said it's in cooperatives' DNA. You don't need a social responsibility group. It's in their DNA to be concerned about the community. We have about a minute left. Any parting words?
Time went fast,
didn't
it?
Yeah, and you have a lot of knowledge. I thank you so much for sharing it. I love when I'm learning, and I've learned several things from you today.
I'm very excited about working with you on promoting this more. Hopefully you'll have me back to talk to your audience again sometime soon.
Once a month? Or?
As much as we can. That would be great. I just really can't say enough how much I think this is just a fabulous, doable, viable model that we should all be trying to figure out how we can participate in and help promote more. We do need to get more policies passed. Some states don't have good co-op laws. Some states don't have any funding mechanisms to support co-op development. We need to work on that also.
Okay. Well, I thank you for being on. We'll be back next Thursday. And we just have a cooperative week, working together with your family and friends to get things done in your community and U.S. and the world. Thank you, Dr. Gordon Nembhard.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
And happy Black History Month.
1450 WOL.